Welcome to this training for the North Texas Coerced Debt Representation Pilot Program. We have myself, Ann Badur. I direct the Fair Financial Services project at Texas Appleseed, and I'll pass it to Brianna to introduce herself.
Hey y'all, see my camera's doing that thing I was telling you about. My name is Brianna Gordley. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a senior policy analyst at Texas Appleseed. So Ann and I are a small but mighty team of two. And I'll pass it to Melissa.
Hey there, I am Melissa Gray and I work at Texas Advocacy Project and I'm the pro bono director there. So I am the one who matches the clients with the pro bono attorneys.
We also have, as part of our team, Lauren Juveras with the Texas Council on Family Violence, who's also a resource. But we'll go ahead and jump in to the presentation. So we wanted to start with a little bit of gratitude for all of you. We were so excited when your programs were willing and interested to participate in this pilot. And I think that you all will bring a lot of substance and value and experience. And so it means a lot to have you as partners. We're going to start with a little poll just to understand the scope of your practice and how often you work with survivors of domestic violence. Right. So it sounds like a fair number of you have a good deal of experience working with survivors. So some of the information we share may be familiar, some new, but we really look forward to engaging with you in this important work. So this is an overview of what we'll be covering today. We're going to give you a brief history of the pilot and coerced debt, just to place this in a context of the work that's been done in this area, an introduction to coerced debt so that you can better understand and identify it with your clients, an overview of this pilot program and the nuts and bolts, how it works, how to participate, how to make a referral through the pilot program to the Texas Advocacy Project. Then we'll have some Q&A and a break, and then jump into trauma-informed care. And Melissa will be giving us a great training on that topic, and then close out with next steps. So just to jump in with a brief history of the pilot was developed by a group called the Texas Coalition on Coerced Debt, and Texas Appleseed is a founding member of the coalition, but it also includes the Texas Advocacy Project, Texas Council on Family Violence, Lone Star Legal Aid. Members of Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid have been active in the past, Texas Legal Services Center, and others. And we've just come together around the issue of coerced debt, and a problem that a lot of domestic violence programs have identified, which is the issue of financial abuse and particularly debts incurred by abusers in the name of survivors. And so coming together, we first started working together in 2018, and the first effort was a legislative effort in 2019. We were able to successfully change state law so that identity theft included debts that were incurred not just without someone's knowledge, which would be the typical definition of fraud, but also through force or threat or coercion. And the following session, we were able to change the Business and Commerce Code, which has some civil court protections that we'll be talking about later on in this training, to declare someone a victim of identity theft. And we also added the similar language, including coercion and force, to the definition of identity theft, so that survivors of domestic violence would have access to the same kinds of identity theft protections as other people who are victims of identity theft. But one of the things we found was, despite these legislative successes, survivors continued to face barriers in accessing these legal protections. They would try to access them on their own or with an advocate, but oftentimes they were facing some legal barriers and needed an attorney to be able to truly benefit from them. And so we launched this pilot in May of 2024 with the goal of helping survivors to access these identity theft protections and by connecting them with a pro bono attorney. And we're really excited. TAP is one of the key partners, and as a trauma-informed legal service provider, they are the ones who are coordinating the legal services side of the work. The pilot is going to continue through November of 2025, and so we're really excited to be pulling you all in at this point, given that we have almost a full year remaining in the pilot period. And we hope that what we will learn from this is how to streamline and effectively run a program like this so that we can expand it potentially statewide to serve survivors across a broader geographic region, and to really have a better functioning program that can truly meet their needs. And so now I'm going to pass it on to Brianna, who's going to dive into coerced debt and start the real substantive part of the training.
Thanks, Anne. So yeah, we're going to talk about coerced debt. And can you move on? I can't remember if there's a poll here or not on the next slide. No poll. Okay, yeah. So I'm just very curious for folks, if you've heard the term coerced debt, let me know in the chat. You probably can guess maybe what it means, but I would love to know before this training if you even knew what the term meant. So we know, where does coerced debt come from? We see this as an umbrella. So we know that here in Texas and Louisiana, there was a study done by the Center for Survivor Agency and Justice. They found that survivors in Texas and Louisiana, 96% of them sought help at DV programs, domestic violence programs, due to economic abuse that was perpetrated in an intimate relationship. And so economic abuse looks like a lot of different things. Financial abuse is a part of that. You can also see economic abuse as manipulating employment conditions. An abuser will do this, manipulating transportation, so limiting a survivor's ability to, transport. It's really this huge umbrella here. And so under that, we have financial abuse, and under financial abuse, we have coerced debt. And you can move on. And so what is coerced debt? I've got this textbook definition, and then I'm going to give you all some examples to really help break this down in terms we can better understand. So it's any non-consensual credit-related transaction that occurs within an abusive intimate relationship. I also want to, caveat here that coerced debt can happen in other relationships as well. When we think intimate, we think like a relationship with a partner, like a marriage, but also this can be with foster youth as well. Foster youth also fall victim to coerced debt by their caretakers. Also, coerced debt can impact older adults too, who are financially reliant on a caretaker as well. But in this context, we're talking about survivors of abuse. And so when I say any non-consensual credit-related transaction, it's tied to credit. So when you think of debt, we're talking about a car loan, right? Like a student loan, a payday loan, and it's any non-consensual credit-related transaction. And so coerced debt is really at the center of domestic violence and identity theft. So we have domestic violence. This is a person that's in an abusive relationship. But then we have identity theft. And Anne touched on this a bit, but when you think of identity theft, you think of this happening from a stranger, someone maybe scamming you online, finding out your personal information, you getting those texts or those robocalls from people saying that if you don't go buy gift cards, you're going to get arrested, things like that. And then they're able to, perpetrate fraud against you, potentially steal your identity. Absolutely, that happens. However, identity theft also happens in abusive relationships. Just because you know the person doesn't mean that it's not identity theft. And so what we know is that in an abusive relationship, if we have an abuser that is using their victim's personal information to take out loans, that's identity theft. And so in this situation, the survivor has lost all control over the ability to make financial decisions for themselves. The abuser is completely in control here. And so that's where we have this connection between coerced debt and identity theft. And so this is a question that we get asked a lot. This is a question I think a lot of people, even if they don't feel comfortable asking, think this is one of our biases here. How does someone end up with debt without their knowledge or consent, right? Like, shouldn't you know what's happening? Shouldn't you know if you have credit cards in your name? How do you let this happen to you? It's kind of that victim blaming language. And so here's our answer right here. You've got these 3 different types of coerced debt. So again, we have fraud. This is when a survivor doesn't know. They have no idea that a debt's been taken out in their name. So this is when an abuser uses a survivor's personal information, but the survivor actually does not know. And so, for example, an abuser could use the survivor's social security number that they found, in their filing cabinet and apply for a car loan or a credit card. This is your standard fraud without awareness, knowledge, or consent. But then you have these two other conditions, and this is where it gets trickier for people to understand. But these are other reasons why people end up in debt, either with or without their knowledge. Coercion. And so when you're thinking about an abusive relationship, there's a lot of power and control dynamics here. And so if you feel threatened that if you don't do something, you're going to get hurt, then you're going to do that thing or you're going to consent to that thing. Consent. And so when we see coercion and coerced debt, this means that an abuser is using demands and they're using threats to essentially force the survivor to take on debt that they wouldn't have. And this stems from fear. Oh, if I don't take out this debt, they're going to hurt me, or they're going to hurt the children, or they might hurt themselves. So while they may be consenting in the more broad way that we understand it, we don't see that as effective consent. That's not real. That's coerced consent. And then you have manipulation. And this is when you have an abuser deliberately managing or manipulating conditions to cause a survivor to take out a debt. So before working at Texas Appleseed, I worked at a few different shelters, one in Austin, Texas called Safe Lions, and I worked in the housing program. And I remember talking to my client. We were going through the credit report because we were trying to get them an apartment and we needed to just see what was going on and if they had any evictions, what this looked like. And through that, we did an assessment of all the coerced debts that they had. And I was just asking them to walk me through, oh, were you aware of this debt or were you not aware of this debt? How did you end up taking this debt out? And through that conversation, I saw what manipulation in real life looks like. So the survivor that I was working with, their abusive partner convinced the survivor that they needed to take out a loan to cover medical bills. The abuser was saying, oh, my mom's in the hospital. We really need to make sure we help her. Can you take out this loan to cover those expenses? Don't worry, she'll pay you back. It'll be okay. And out of good faith and believing their partner, that's exactly what the survivor did, only for that money to go straight to the abuser and the survivor had no access to that. And so that's one of those ways that we're talking about manipulation. That could sound so drastic. It's often not. These are exactly the types of manipulative tactics that abusers are doing to assert power and control. And so before the legislative changes that we advocated for, there was this main problem when it came to coerced debt protections for survivors. If a survivor had a fraudulent coerced debt, meaning they didn't know about it at all, then that was considered identity theft in statute. But if they had a coerced debt that they did know about, but that they didn't actually consent to, there was no protections for them. They weren't covered under identity theft. And so this was really the main problem that we were looking at addressing when we were going through our legal advocacy or our legislative advocacy to fix this. And so a couple of other examples of abuse for coerced debt. You've got an abuser making the survivor take out a credit card or a loan against their wishes. So, right, that's that coercion piece. They're forcing them to do this. Or the abuser taking out a loan, a mortgage, a credit card in the victim's name, whether that be without or with their knowledge. I'm also putting bills in the victim's name too, like credit card bills or even, phone bills or utility bills. Those absolutely can be coerced debts as well. And so really the nature of coerced debt means that there are negative and sometimes even very violent consequences if the victim doesn't do what the abuser asks. And so there are many times where if you are aware of the debt, taking out the debt does feel like the safest option for them. And so we've got a study here, really just looking at the frequency, nature, and effects of coerced debt. And so just some pretty drastic statistics I wanted to point out. 71%, so almost 3 in 4 survivors reported that their partners kept or hid financial information from them. You can read some of the other ones, but we've got about half, 52%, reported that an abusive partner put debt in their name, whether that be fraudulently or through a coercive transaction. You've got, and to me, a statistic I feel sticks out the most is the last one, which is 73% of survivors said that they stayed longer than they wanted to in an abusive relationship because of financial concerns. And that's exactly, what an abuser wants. And that is what ends up happening when survivors have these coerced debts. And so, where does a coerced debt show up? There's a list of reason or a list of ways in which survivors recognize that they have coerced debts. One of the more common ways is a creditor or a bill collector contacting a survivor. So, a survivor getting a phone call, being very confused, I don't have that debt, or that's not me, or this has to be a mistake, and then realizing through that collection call that they do, in fact, have a coerced debt. Getting sued for a coerced debt, or even worse, getting a default judgment because you didn't show up to court because why would you? You didn't realize that you had a debt to begin with. Reviewing a credit report, which I'm sure you all have a lot of familiarity with, is another way that survivors can see coerced debts. Or applying for a new loan or credit card. We've heard cases of folks who think that they have no credit history at all, getting denied for a credit card because apparently they're delinquent on 3 or 4 different accounts, those accounts being coerced debts. Discovering charges on new credit or financial statements, an abuser potentially confessing to, oh, I took out this credit card in your name, and even in divorce proceedings. So we work with several attorneys who have talked about how whenever a survivor is going through a divorce and they are reviewing credit reports and reviewing financial accounts and statements, that through that process they discover coerced debts. So I'd love to hear from y'all if you have worked with survivors that or clients that have coerced debts. Where did you find out? Where have you seen coerced debt present? If anyone wants to share, or if anyone wants to put it in the chat, and it's okay if we don't want to. I just would love to hear if any folks want to share ways that they've seen this with their clients. And I'm not afraid of silence, so I will be quiet for a second. Angel, sometimes in a probate process. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I haven't heard that one. Anyone else have any thoughts? While working with clients in jail. Yes. Very, very unfortunate. Any other thoughts, y'all? I know I listed a bunch, but just curious if y'all have any other ways that you've discovered coerced debts. Wage earner, single income home, stuck in a lease, Social Security checks in cash to family members who are not providing help to clients. So something I'll say, wage earner and single income home stuck in a lease. So, through the pilot program, and we'll get more into this, and Melissa can even talk more to this. A lot of the referrals that we initially were getting were actually related to leases. So, a survivor and the abuser move in together. The abuser initially agrees to pay for rent, whether it be 50/50 or 100%, and then they leave. And essentially the survivor is stuck with that lease payment, or that rental payment. At that state, it's actually not coerced debt because it's not debt. It's financial abuse. We can make an argument that it's financial abuse, but it's not technically debt, right, until something's been sent to collections or it's something that is being owed. And kind of same with social security checks. You can definitely make an argument that that's absolutely financial abuse. That's manipulation. That's a different level of economic abuse. But again, in this state, we actually wouldn't consider that coerced debt. And I think that's what's so tricky about financial abuse and coerced debt is financial abuse is so pervasive that sometimes it kind of does bleed together and it can be confusing on what exactly is the difference. And so that's why it's helpful for us to see these examples too, because these last two definitely can be financial abuse, but in this case, we would not see those as coerced debt. We can move on in. Okay, awesome. So is it really not possible for people to leave abusive relationships when they're potentially faced with financial ruin? Again, this is when we have that victim blaming language coming in. Oh, well, if you're struggling financially, why don't you just leave before it gets worse? And there's several reasons for that. So, and if we would move on to the next, the first is that financial dependence, a strong financial dependency has occurred when you have an abuser manipulating a victim financially. And so if an abuser has taken out coerced debts in the survivor's name, if they are controlling all of the money, all the finances, It is extremely difficult for a survivor to even be able to leave to begin with because they're completely financially dependent on their abuser. Transitioning down to credit reports, if they do have coerced debts, most likely the abuser is not paying them. And so the survivor's credit can be completely shot, making it very difficult for them to access credit again to be able to leave, sometimes to even get a job, or to even potentially get housing because bad credit is absolutely a reason that landlords often deny leases to survivors. And then from all of these problems, you have financial hardship again. If your credit's shot, if you have no money, if you have no ability to get a home, to buy a car to leave, these are really pervasive effects that coerced debt has, that financial abuse has, that economic abuse has. And so it is never as simple as why don't you just leave? Um, because there are a lot of really invasive economic conditions and reasons surrounding the survivor into why they can't leave even if they wanted to. And also too, something that I like to help put perspective into people. Let's say, you have kids or even if you don't and you do decide to leave, where would you go? How would you be able to leave? Are you going to walk out of that house? To what job? To what shelter? And so it just is extremely difficult. And of course, that makes it even that much harder. And so something again to clarify, and I started to talk on this a bit, but not all debts that are incurred during an abusive relationship are coerced debts. There has to be at least one of those three mechanisms of coerced debt present, right? So it was taking out fraudulently, the survivor was coerced into taking it out, or they were manipulated into taking it out. And so, when we talk about a lease assignment in house, an abuser says they'll pay for that lease, but then they don't. There's no fraud present there. There's most likely no coercion present there, and there's no manipulation. So that's really how we determine what's coerced at and what's not. Um, and so even let's say we have debts that are willingly obtained, and so a survivor agrees to take out a credit card, but the survivor was then left with that after leaving the abusive relationship. Unfortunately, that is not coerced debt either. Likely. It's always kind of case by case, but most likely. Also, debts that the survivor did not know about or feared a harmful consequence for saying no are likely coerced debt. So make sure that you see the difference there. The pilot program is here to help survivors with those specific coerced debts. It is not this, general guarantee that this is going to repair your credit. And so that's something that we wanted to discuss too. I mean, if a survivor has like 10 coerced debts, right, and they all fall within that statute of limitations and they're all able to be wiped off their credit report, yeah, it might actually help their credit, sure. But the goal is not necessarily to improve credit. The goal is to just get those coerced debts removed. So that's one less barrier that survivors are encountering when they're trying to rebuild their financial stability and well-being. And so now Anne's going to launch the second poll. How confident do you feel about your understanding of coerced debt? Kind of as we've gone through this, we've talked about what it's rooted in, we've given examples, and we've talked about what it is and what it isn't. How comfortable do you feel? And it's okay if you're not confident. That is very understanding too. It can be a complex process. Okay, y'all. So it looks like I feel good about this. We've got folks that are somewhat confident. We've got very confident. We've got one of us that's not confident, and that's okay. That's what I'm here for. And we'll talk more later about how we're all here to help support folks if you're not too sure if what you're looking at with the client is coerced debt. And so now we're actually going to talk about the pilot program, the goals of the program, and then what it actually means to participate. And so the main goal of the program, the Coerced Debt Pilot Program, is to identify, refer, and connect survivors that have coerced debts to free legal services. And the legal services that they're entering into are going to help them receive a court order. This court order declares the survivor a victim of identity theft. And this is what we call a Chapter 521 order. We coined that term because it is Chapter 521 of the Business and Commerce Code, like Anne was talking about earlier. And so, in order to get this Chapter 521 order, an uncontested lawsuit must be filed And what that means is that there's no one else on the other side. There's no one else being sued. Kind of how I like to explain it to people is it's almost like you're suing the debt itself. And so, really, what this is about is getting relief for the survivor. Getting a Chapter 521 order, if it's successful, can help survivors clean up their credit by making it easier for them to remove those coerced debts from credit reports. And there's also a lot of other benefits too. And so, financial coaches, you all play a really crucial role in this process by ensuring that survivors are properly screened for coerced debts, which we'll talk about, that they have assistance in pulling their credit reports, and that they're referred to Texas Advocacy Project. Texas Advocacy Project, with Melissa, we'll talk more about, is really the main referral agency here. So you make referrals to them, and they do all of the very hard work of making sure that survivors are matched to the free legal services that we're talking about. And so again, what is a Chapter 521 order? This is actually the Business and Commerce Code here. This is copy and pasted, y'all, right from Texas statute. And you can see here it says court order declaring an individual a victim of identity theft. So I highlighted at the bottom here where it says in A, declaring that that person's a victim of identity theft, and then in B, regardless of whether that person is able to identify each person. And so really, again, what this means is it is a lawsuit. So it's a lawsuit in the civil courts. It's against the debt, is another way to say it. So it's uncontested. There is no other side. There's not one person here. You don't have like the survivor here arguing against the abuser. That's not what this is. It is just about asserting that the survivor is a victim of identity theft for X, Y, and Z coerced debts, and getting a court order stating that. And this order is really important, again, because it can be used to block coerced debts on a credit report. And the goal right then is once those debts are removed to improve credit scores and to help survivors once again rebuild their financial lives. And so who is participating in the pilot program? So first you've got 3 statewide organizations: Texas Advocacy Project, which you'll hear Melissa talk about, Texas Council on Family Violence, which you have Lauren here, and so she can also briefly talk about that too, and then Texas Appleseed, where Ann and I work. We all play different roles. Texas Appleseed, we mainly are coordinating the pilot program. Texas Council on Family Violence is helping with that coordination and providing support to the DV programs. And then Texas Advocacy Project is handling all of the referrals and also providing support to the attorneys. And we also have 8 local domestic violence programs and financial coaching programs. So we have Ascend Dallas and Pathfinders. You two are our most recent additions, and you are the only 2 financial coaching organizations. We started initially with 5 DV programs, and we added 1 recently. So they're all either serving Dallas or Tarrant County, because this pilot program is only in North Texas. So we have Genesis, Mosaic, Safe Haven, Texas Muslim Women's Foundation, the Family Place, and Salvation Army, which I'm sure you all might actually recognize a lot of these organizations because we know you'll work with some of them. And then also when we were developing this pilot program and really building out the process, we worked with 3 legal experts, someone from the National Consumer Law Center, someone from Lone Star Legal Aid, and then a currently retired attorney, Paula Pierce, who has a lot of expertise in actually getting Chapter 521 orders. And so the process is we see kind of as this 3-pronged process. So you have advocates, either domestic violence program advocates or financial coach advocates. You're screening survivors for coerced debt. So you're trying to determine, okay, we think that they're going to be preliminarily eligible for this pilot program. And that being the case, we're going to go ahead and refer those clients to the Texas Advocacy Project. TAP then receives those referrals and they connect survivors with the pro bono attorneys. And the pro bono attorneys will work with survivors to get that court order, the Chapter 521 order, declaring them a victim of identity theft. So this screen and refer, TAP connects survivors to attorneys do their job, get the court orders, boom, bam. And so what is your program's main role in the pilot program? To identify survivors that are eligible and interested to participate in the pilot program. Keyword on interested. Will be survivors who are eligible that don't care. This is not their main concern. This is not what they can focus on, and that's okay too. So not only are you trying to find survivors that are eligible, but also that want to participate in a process like this. And then making sure that you're referring the survivors to Texas Advocacy Project. And this also includes screening for coerced debts, and we'll go over what that looks like, and then helping survivors pull their credit reports, which we don't actually really need to go over since this is a part of y'all's jobs. Additional roles for your organizations. Each month, Melissa and myself and Lauren meet with all 6 of the DV programs to really just check in and to see how they're doing, to workshop different problems. Ascend and Pathfinders will either join those meetings or have their own. We're working out some of the dynamics around that. It's good to have those check-ins. We're really just trying to get feedback on how things are going, answer any questions folks have, and really work through any problems and challenges. Something else that we offer are trainings. So we call them training boosters. I'd say at this point, we've been having them every 3 months or so. We get ideas for what to talk about based off of what the DV programs have been saying. And so it really will be up to your organization if, as you're going through this process, you recognize, oh, I'm having a bit of a hard time really understanding coerced debt. Can you give us a refresher on what coerced debt is? And can we get into more detailed discussion? Okay, sure. Then we would host a training booster about that, kind of those things. So we host those and make sure that we always, tell people in advance and record them and put them up on our website. Also, I hold office hours every day from 4 to 4:45. Folks usually just drop in to ask a question here or there if they don't want to send an email. I'm just here really anytime that you need to talk, or maybe you have questions. I'm not sure if I should refer this client. What do you think? We talk through it and come to a decision. If those hours don't work, you can email me. Here's my email. I'll be emailing everyone after this, and you'll also have my email and my phone number. You can call me, whatever is easiest for you. We can also set up a different time to chat as well. And so now we're going to kind of get into the process. So we created a website, a resource website for the pilot program, because we recognize that there are a lot of supported documents. It's not a difficult process, but when you're joining the process, you need to know where everything is. You need to understand what the process is. And so we're going to take a look at this website after we run through each of the components of the referral. And so here is the process. In order for someone to participate in the pilot program, they have to be a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking. The reason for that is because this is a program for survivors of abuse. And so they have to fall into one of those categories in order to be referred at all to TAP. Once you confirm that, you then are able to complete a coerced debt screening tool. Anna, are you going to click on this now, or are we going to look at that after? I can't remember.
Would you like to go through it now?
Let's go ahead and look at it now. So this is the next step. Okay, it looks like I might be working with a client who is a survivor, but that doesn't automatically mean that they have coerced debts. And so this is an assessment or a screening tool that we put together in collaboration with legal experts, the coordinators of the pilot program, and feedback from the domestic violence programs. It's 2 sections here. One, you have this section kind of explaining what the pilot program is, right? Free legal service available. We call these coerced debts. Here's what the legal protection is. Everything I've told you essentially up to this point, we put here in the beginning. This is a script. You can actually read this word for word. You can give this to the client you're working with for them to take a look at. And then we ask a series of, I believe, 5 questions. If they answer yes to even one of them, you can make the referral. So first, has your abusive partner kept financial information from you? Yes or no. If they want to provide additional information, they can. They are not required to. Have they ever pressured, threatened, or forced you to borrow money? Yes or no. An option to provide more information. Sometimes people want to, sometimes they don't. Have you ever found out about debts or bills that your abusive partner put in your name? Yes or no?
That, this guy is trying to be.
Okay. Have you ever been in the past or currently being contacted about a debt? Okay, so there are 4 main questions. If they answered yes to any of those, then you go to question 5. Are you interested in getting legal help to address these debt-related problems? And Okay, we'll talk about 6 in a second. So 4 main questions. If they answer yes to any of them, you know for sure, okay, I'm going to make this referral. We did this process because it's supposed to take out a lot of the guesswork for you. It's really up to the attorneys to determine, okay, this is coerced debt, we can move forward. We're not attorneys, we're not legal experts, so we just wanted you all to look at these 4 questions. Again, if a survivor answers, checks at least yes to one of them, then you can move forward with the referral. And you'll see that last question on there I skipped. It's about pulling the credit report. And so we needed to pull a credit report at this stage for a lot of different reasons. One reason being, in order to determine, for the attorneys to determine if there's coerced debts, they need to be able to look at a survivor's credit report to do so. And so we're asking you all, after you complete this screening tool, okay, they checked yes to at least one of the questions. We're going to ask you all to help them pull their credit reports. I'm sure you all know this. I don't think I need to go into too much detail. It is important to pull all 3, but just one of those credit reports is enough. And so what we've seen is there have been some advocates that have worked directly with survivors side by side to help pull it. Sometimes survivors themselves will pull it and then give it to, like, email a copy or sometimes even print a copy and give it to the advocate. Whatever it is, there needs to be at least one credit report pulled before that referral is made. And now we're going to move into a release of information. So I'm curious, before we look into this, is anyone familiar with what a release of information is? Do you all work with releases of information? Have you heard of one before? Silence may mean no or yes. So a release of information.
I've never worked with them before. This is Selma.
Thanks, Sama.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Jennifer, you've used them in other jobs. Okay.
Yeah.
So for some of y'all, this may be familiar, and it's going to look like a lot when we show it to you. Here, Toby said, yes, our clients who are reentry clients. Okay, so this may actually look familiar, y'all. So we're going to pull this up. A release of information is just that. Essentially, it is the survivor, and we have 2 of these, one for Ascend Dallas and one for Pathfinder. So ignore the Ascend one if you don't work at Ascend. It's essentially the survivor giving you, the advocate, permission to share certain information to an organization. And so in this case, that information would be the screening tool and the credit report being shared to tap when you make the referral. So, Anne, can you go back to the top of this document? It's a lot of words because it just explains, it breaks down very simply to the client. This is what this release of information is for. So survivors don't fill this out, they only sign it, but essentially you are filling it out. We actually pre-filled almost everything here for you. So at first, at the top of the box, it says read first. This is for the client to read so that they understand, oh, that is what I'm signing this document for. Essentially, what this means is you can only share whatever the survivor allows you to share to another organization. For this case, you are going to share anything related to the pilot program necessary to Texas Advocacy Project. And so we filled in a lot of this for you already. At this box where it says who I want to have my information, we filled it out for you. It is Melissa at the Texas Advocacy Project and intake staff. There's their contact, so you don't need to fill that out. You have these 2 check boxes here. So Ascend Dallas may share information by phone and by email. Those are the 2 options there. Ascend Dallas can share the following info. We already filled that out. Any information or documentation related to the pilot program. Again, that's probably just going to be the screening tool and the credit report, but sometimes TAP will call one of the DV programs and they'll talk about a client. And so sometimes that's some of the information that's being shared too. And you need a release for that, which is this. Reason for sharing: to participate in the Coerced Debt pilot program. And so then there's just a series of boxes that the client would need to check just so that they know they don't have to sign this. It just essentially streamlines the process in order for you all to be able to make that referral. We'll talk about, and Melissa will, what happens if a client doesn't want to sign this. Then there's a different way they have to go about getting into the program. But so far, every client in the pilot program has signed a release of information. It expires 60 days from the date that it's signed. So here the client would just sign it, date it, time it, and then the advocate would sign it. Again, this is just one of those guarantees that, okay, I am allowed to communicate with Texas Advocacy Project about my client's case. I am allowed to share this screening tool with them, and I can share this credit report with them, because a lot of personal information, y'all, is in these documents. And so you want to make sure that you're checking the boxes, crossing your T's, dotting your I's, and making sure that you have full affirmative consent from a survivor to share this information. And so that is something that you will need to fill out and keep in your records. This doesn't go to Texas Advocacy Project. This is for you to know that you have permission to share information about this client to TAP related only to the Coerced pilot program. And so, okay, before I read 5, I'm going to cover it one more time. 1, make sure that the client is a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking. 2, complete the Coerced screening tool. That's that document I showed. You can do it online. Melissa, you can talk about if you're getting submissions, like if they're PDFs or if they're faxed over, scanned, whatever it is. Make sure you complete that. And if they check yes to even one of those, ask them if they want to participate in the pilot program. And if they do, okay, great. Then you're going to help them pull their credit report or pull it for them, whatever your system is. At least 1 credit report, but all 3 would be beautiful, but again, at least 1. And then, okay, great, we've done the screening tool, we pulled the credit report. In order to send this information to TAP, we need to make sure we've got that release of information. So make sure you have the one right for your organization. Fill that out, make sure the survivor understands what they're signing, make sure that they consent. And again, we'll talk about if they don't want to do that. Okay, they've signed everything. Beautiful. So now what we're going to do is we're going to complete the TAP referral form. It sounds like a lot, y'all, but once you do one, you really get into the process. And so, Anne, can you click on the TAP referral form? This is a standard agency referral document specific to the pilot program. And so you'll also see here when it was updated, we just updated this. And so the referring agency will be you. So pathfinders are assigned the date that you're making the referral, and then some information about the survivor. So their name, their email address, date of birth, phone number, safest way to contact them, safest time, safest way to email or leave a message. And then very basic information about the abuser, their full name, their date of birth. And then it's going to break down some questions here. This is a fillable PDF, so you can type as much or as little as you want. What is your understanding of the survivor's legal needs? While this is for the Coerced pilot program, sometimes there are additional needs that survivors may have legally. And so if you happen to know about those, the survivor happens to share, feel free to put that down. If not, you can just put Coerced pilot program. There's no worries. Any languages that the survivor speaks, anything additional that would be helpful to know. And then which credit report, if any, you were able to attach to the referral. And if you didn't, or you weren't able to pull a credit report, why? And we've had some folks try, but there was a block, and so they weren't able to pull it, and that is one reason. Or the survivor didn't want to, or they didn't have the capacity to, or you haven't heard back from them. Really, whatever it is, if you don't have a credit report, please let us know why. And if the survivor did consent to sending in that screening tool, make sure you check that box, because some don't want that information to be transmitted, others don't mind. And so whenever you complete this form, with it, you'll send an email to Melissa. There's 2 emails here. Please send it to both. It's also on that form, y'all, too. Case referral at texasadvocacyproject.org and mgray@texasadvocacyproject.org. Those are the 2 emails that you send it to: the referral form, the screening tool, and the credit report. 3 documents. After TAP receives this, they will contact the client directly. So they're not going to contact you. They're going to contact the client, because this is who the referral is for. It's usually within a week. I think Melissa was saying honestly about 2 days at this point, but at the most a week, to set up a legal consult to start the process of entering the Coerced pilot program. And now, Anne, we can click on the website to show you where all of this documentation is. And we'll make sure that y'all have very easy access to this as well. So this is a link that is hidden. You can't find this on the Texas Appleseed website. You have to have the web address, so we ask that you do not share this with anyone outside of the folks that are participating in the pilot program. You'll want to click on resources for advocates. And then here it says resources for domestic violence programs and financial coaches. And so we have a series of information on here for y'all. We've done 2 training boosters already, one on how to pull credit reports, and then one on a general overview of the pilot program and a deeper dive into coerced debt. We have broken out more intense trainings here. We did an in-person training back in April for all 5 of the DV programs. It was about 4 hours. It was very intense. And so what we did is we recorded each section after. So if you want more information or you want a refresher of any of what we've talked about or a deeper dive, you can absolutely click and watch any of these videos. They're quite short. Then we have the screening tool. So when we were saying to complete that screening tool, we have one in English and one in Spanish. If you click these links, it takes you to a PDF version and you can type in or you could print and write, whatever's easiest for you. And then we have referring to tab. So the first form, Text Advocacy Project referral form, that's the form that you need to use and send as a referral. Also something I did, because it can be a lot to remember, is we created a document called Process and Timeline. So if you click on this document, it takes you through really everything I just talked about. Just like a step-by-step of the options to get into the pilot program, the screening tool, the referral form. It just says all of what I said, but on a piece of paper. And then we have a section here about identifying and disputing coerced debts. And this was an initial component of the pilot program, having advocates review the credit reports for coerced debts and try and dispute them. We're no longer requiring that, but there's information about that if you're curious. And then some additional resources. So on here, by the end of the week, there will be 2 new documents, and one of those will be the release of information for your organization. So when that's available, again, I'm going to send an email to all of y'all so that you have all this information, but additional resources is where you will find that release of information document. And that is the website. I might be done now. I can't remember. Oh, right. Safety considerations. So we all know that y'all are very well versed in how to pull credit reports. But something that we want to really hint on, or we really want to focus in on, are the really unique safety considerations when you are pulling credit reports for survivors of abuse. And so first, when pulling credit reports, it's very, very important to use a safe address or one unknown to the abuser. I'm sure you all know, but if you're getting your credit report online, any information that you put in when you're accessing it becomes a part of your file. And so if I'm putting in my current address to access my credit report, they'll use that current address and put it on my credit report. And this could be very dangerous for survivors if an abuser has no way to access that credit report too. They could potentially find the survivor's most recent location, and that's not what we want. And so again, we want to make sure that you're using a safe address, a PO box, or one that is completely unknown to the abuser. Online, you actually can use an old address. You don't have to use your most current one. I've tested this out before, accessing it, not using where I currently live. David, including soft inquiries. David, what do you mean by that? Do you mind hopping off mute and explaining?
Yes, what I meant is that sometimes we do soft inquiries that actually don't pull the whole credit report, it's just a piece of it.
Right.
I don't know if that one, as you say, will get into the database of the.
That's a good question, because you all, if I remember this correctly, Samatabi, you might have to clarify. You all have like an agreement with, I think, a couple of the bureaus to where you have a way to get in. That's a good question. I don't have an answer to that now that I think about it. And I don't know if you know, but that is something that I will look into, because that's not something that we've come across, right? Like, we have normally DV program advocates are doing it side by side, so they don't have this special. I don't actually know. So David, I want to look at it.
Yeah,
I
and
have a question.
into the
Yeah, go
same
ahead.
question, if you don't mind, it will be okay to use an address that the victim of domestic violence have already used in the past,
Mhm.
because it's pretty much is going to ask for an address, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So can we use something from the past? I think that will be safe.
Yes,
But-
it
okay.
will be. And what do you?
Yeah.
Thank
No,
you.
I just wanted to clarify that it's important for this pilot to pull the credit report from annualcreditreport.com. I think that we'd heard from some folks at Ascend and Pathfinders that you all have an agreement with particular, maybe it's Experian or one of the credit reporting bureaus to pull credit reports, but it's important that this be pulled from annualcreditreport.com. Just because that has the most the complete information. It's something that the survivor can also take with them. You can download a copy because it has to be transmitted along with the referral form. So I think that might be something a little bit different. And so some of this information is related to the process for pulling a credit report through that online tool, that sometimes when people enter an address, then it will then become part of their official credit report.
You're correct, and that's one thing that Ascend team we're in agreement with TransUnion and Experience, and we're not allowed to share the copy of the credit report. So that's why it's going to be important, I believe Brianna said earlier, to walk them along the process of the annual credit report. So obviously, if they want to be pulled by ours, but also say, okay, let's walk you through the annualcreditreport.com.
Yeah, Selma, thank you so much for clarifying, and you too.
Yeah.
I forgot about that agreement. So yes, you all can't on your end show, right, the version of the credit report you get. You can't give that to the client, but we're really hoping that you all can help them pull their own credit report with the knowledge and expertise that you all have. In that case, all of this does apply, right? You want to be sure, like you said, David, you can absolutely use an old address. We encourage that. Some people make up an address. Sometimes I've seen that work. Sometimes I haven't. It just depends. And same with mail. So the credit report is sometimes going to be sent to the address that's on file. So if you have a survivor requesting a credit report via mail, you want to make sure again that that address is updated to a new safe address for any mailings.
Yeah, and one of the things, just some practical guidance, and on the resources website, there's a little document that talks about pulling credit scores from annualcreditreport.com. But just in experience, we found that TransUnion is a good one to pull. That seems to be the most streamlined. They don't ask questions generally to people because a lot of survivors may, if it's identity theft, they may not know the answer to a lot of those questions, like what credit cards do you have or what accounts did you open? If you're a victim of identity theft, you won't necessarily know the correct information. And so we found that TransUnion is one of the easier ones. For some reason, a lot of people on our team have struggled getting their Equifax report lately through annualcreditreport.com, and Experian tends to ask those kinds of security questions. It's great to have those. I mean, it's a good security feature, but it can be a barrier for survivors. So, just like Brianna said, even just one credit report, it's okay if they can't get all three of them, but if they can get one, and then it's fairly easy if it's through a website or even on a cell phone, you can basically save it as a PDF. I think on a computer, you would print it and then print it as a PDF, and then you have that PDF version. On a cell phone, there are different options to download or save the contents of a website as a PDF. But that would be the mechanism that would be used to be able to retain these and then submit them with the application or the referral to TAP. Does that sound familiar? Is that clear for everybody?
Yes, that sounds
Great.
Thanks, Selma. Thanks, Anne.
Yeah.
Making sure I don't duplicate anything you say. Okay. And then for credit file information. And so again, whenever you're going to, or when a survivor is accessing their credit report, it'll ask right for an address, a telephone, sometimes an email. Again, any of that information shared when pulling credit reports will become a part of the survivor's credit file, and could be used for future contact. And so again, just making sure that you're not sharing information that could use to discover a safe address or otherwise harm the survivor. This may sound dramatic. It's just simply not. Abusers are so innovative in the ways that they find and stalk and harass survivors. And so we want to make sure that we're equipping you all with all of the information and safeguards necessary so that in the event of you helping a survivor, we're not inadvertently hurting them as well.
And just one additional thing with regard to the telephone number, generally the website that when people are trying to access their credit reports, they will have to input a cell phone number to receive a text. There is an email option. Personally, for me, that option or a calling option, those options haven't worked as well, but the cell phone. So hopefully people will have a safe a cell phone that they can provide there that would not compromise their safety, but that's extremely helpful as just a practical matter in verifying identity.
We can move on to the next slide. Okay, y'all. So this is the last thing I'm going to say. Pilot program evaluation. So we are working with a partner of ours, Dr. Adrian Adams at Michigan State University, who is evaluating the pilot program. This evaluation program has its own funding, its own team, so it is separate from what we do here day to day. But we did want to share that this evaluation is happening. And that we are looking to recruit people essentially into the evaluation. So I'll share out this flyer. We just have a little snippet here, but we're just asking to share this flyer with clients that you refer to TAP. So if you do make a successful referral, to please just give them this flyer. You can print it off, you can email it to them. We'll make sure that we provide a link to it in the email. And there is a financial incentive for clients who participate in the evaluation. So it's just to get their experience. Not even folks who have, talked to an attorney yet, or folks who have gotten a Chapter 521 order, but just that have been referred really at any stage. And so again, I'll send a reminder to just ask and plead that you all share this information with your clients. And if they decide not to participate, that is absolutely fine. It does not bar them from participating in the pilot program at all. Okay, I'm passing it on to Melissa. I know I'm a little bit over time, Melissa, so I appreciate your patience. And she's going to talk about TAP.
Hi, everyone. I am really excited to add you as partners to this pilot. We have been getting a lot of referrals from the domestic violence shelters and partners in this program, and I'm eager to see what the survivors that you refer to TAP, what their issues look like, and sort of compare those with the DV shelters. So I'm so happy you're here. I do want to just tell you for a minute, I know that Ascend, you had a conversation with Amanda at Texas Advocacy Project, so you probably know a lot about what we do, but just real quickly, we are a statewide organization that provides free legal services to victims of dating and domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, human trafficking, and stalking. So all of our legal services are free to the client, and we are statewide. So anytime in your personal life or in your professional life, anytime you know of someone who is a victim of those power-based abuse, please feel, and they have civil legal needs, please feel free to send them our way. I will give you our phone number real quick, which I always tell people is so easy to remember, and I hope I remember it right now because otherwise that'd be embarrassing. It is 1-800-374-HOPE. So my CEO likes to say 3 + 4 is 7. So 374-HOPE. And that is our number that people can call and get connected with an intake person who will schedule them with an hour long consultation with a lawyer. We serve clients, any client who is a victim of abuse. It does not matter what their gender, race, sexual orientation, and either socioeconomic status is. We are very rare in that sense. We get funding, not as much as we need, but we do get funding from a lot of private sources, which allows us to serve people who may not fall under that victim or the poverty line that a lot of legal aid organizations require them to be in. We do know that very wealthy victims of abuse also need lawyers and may not, given the financial control of their abuser, may not have access to funds. So we help everyone regardless of that. Okay, Anne, you can go ahead, and I'm not going to talk very long about this process because Brianna, I think you actually did a really great job about it. So Anne, we may just go through these quickly.
Hey, Melissa, can I quickly highlight a question that's in the chat here?
Yes.
Christy, I will put the number in the chat right now. Well, after this, Erica asked, is immigration status required?
No, sorry, should have mentioned that too. Regardless of immigration status, we don't screen for any of that. We do screen for some of these identifiers, or I guess you call it demographics, but we only do that for our funding purposes. They do not. The only people who are not allowed to get our services are abusers. And sometimes they get through pretending that they are the victim and we are conflicted out. That doesn't happen a lot, but it happens enough that we try to be super careful about that. But other than that, if you are a victim of abuse and you live in Texas and you need our services, we will help you as best we can.
Melissa,
criminal background, I see that. No, criminal background is not an issue. I will say that we have what we call at TAP upside down cases. So a lot of times the victim is actually accused of being the abuser, and that sometimes can be very difficult for us to work out, and it may prevent them, but that's only based on the fact that they were potentially the abuser in the situation. So no, a general criminal background does not prevent anyone from getting our services. Okay, well, we've already talked about the screening tool. We've talked about the TAP referral form and the email. So Anne, you could go to the next slide and see if there's something more specific. Okay, I do want to spend a minute on the referral form. I know Brianna went through it. So the referring agency, all of that you understand. It is really important for us to know, or take people to know whether numbers or emails are safe. So I think survivors are pretty astute about this, but since that is not your main population that you work with, just try to remember that sometimes the abusers monitor their phones, sometimes they monitor their emails. We typically, I will say most of our clients, they have a safe number. So it's not usually a big issue, but definitely ask. We need the abuser's full name and date of birth for our conflicts check internally. So typically we wouldn't ask that information, but that is something that TAP requires. And then I also wanted to talk about the survivor's legal needs and also other information that would be helpful. So given what I said, the three main reasons people come to Texas Advocacy Project is for divorce, custody issues, modification orders, all of that, and then finally protective orders. So if you have a client that you're working with that seems to be in an abusive situation and may have needs around that, those are the kinds of things you would put in. We do not need very esoteric legal issues. If you know them, throw them in there. Sometimes we do name changes and ID recoveries and things like that, but really the divorce and the custody and the protective orders are the things that we see most often at TAP. And then additional information might just be something like the person is very hesitant to share financial information. Something like that would be helpful. Okay, sorry, Anne. Okay, so you've already done this with Brianna. I do not need to go over this. You're going to determine the eligibility by using the screening tool. Make sure the survivor wants to be referred to Texas Advocacy Project, and let her know that what's going to happen when she comes to us is that she'll talk to an intake. Within probably 24 to 48 hours, somebody from TAP will call and say, I'm trying to reach you. There was a referral with your name, trying to reach you to schedule an appointment with an attorney. And that will be a 1 hour free legal consult by phone with an attorney. So make sure that they understand the first person who calls them will not be the attorney, but they'll schedule a call with the attorney. And during this hour, they can talk about whatever legal needs they have. Of course, we would love for them to talk about the coerced debt, because then that helps our attorney determine whether we should pass it on to a pro bono attorney. So then you complete the intake form, complete the ROI. Again, that is not something that TAP needs. That is just for your own protection. And then you email the form to case referral. That takes it to our intake specialist, and then also to me. And the reason you email it to me is so I can follow the case along to make sure that intake's happening and check the notes after the attorney's spoken and see if there is coerced debt that we could forward to a pro bono attorney. The other way, Brianna said that there's another way. If they don't want to do the release of information and you don't feel comfortable sharing the information without the release, they can go ahead and just call us. You call us at that 1-800 number. There it is, 374, and then HOPE is 4673 apparently. And they just have to call and say, we also have an online form, by the way. I need to talk to an attorney. I'm a survivor and I have some coerced debt issues. And then that way our intake people will know to flag that client for the pilot. It's not going to be a beautiful system. So far we haven't received anyone who's come in that way. So it's always safe to do the referral if the survivor's comfortable. But there is this other option. So you can either do an online form or you can call us at the 800 number. Okay, Anne.
And there is a question in the chat for those who are still in the abusive relationship. You know, I know that with coerced debt, that can be a little difficult because sometimes, like if a person starts to protect their credit, that can spur additional violence or abuse in the relationship. And so it's a very sensitive issue. But do you, or Brianna or Melissa, would you have guidance for people who are still in the abusive relationships, if there are any additional resources for those who are ready to flee?
I mean, I will say that this is only anecdotally because, you know, I see the cases that we handle here a lot. I would say at least 50% of our clients are in the abusive relationship still. And so that is not, that is something that our attorneys are very well trained in. We also, I should have mentioned, have a whole staff of social workers. So if it becomes something that needs to be elevated, like this is very dangerous, we need to really get this client some help, we will transfer them to our social work team and they will work with them to find shelter, to find some other way. They're very versed in all of that. So that should not, they actually should feel better coming to us if they're in those situations, because we can really help them with solutions. I will say they probably would have to have some sort of legal need, because that is what we do. There are probably other organizations that, but anyway, forget I said that. Literally almost every victim of abuse has a civil legal need. So they'll qualify. Okay, next slide. Okay, so once the referral has been made, our outreach people our intake will reach out to your client. And then we have now that we are fully staffed and up and going, we will probably have depending on when we reach your client, we'll probably have a legal consult with her within a week. So this will move on quickly. Make sure that your client knows that when we call her, it'll either say unknown or blocked number. We cannot tell them, oh, they should call between 12 and 2. With the intake process, we just really don't have that ability. If there is an email address, we will make a call. And if we can't reach the person, we'll follow up with an email. As long as it's a safe email. We will try to contact the the client 3 times, and we'll do various, we'll call, we'll send email, we'll do various techniques, and that will go over the course of about a week to 10 days. And if we do not ever make contact with that person, we will close the case. We've started now calling the advocates to say, hey, by the way, never could reach that client that you referred. do you want to touch base with them? They can always try again. So that doesn't mean that they can never do the program again. It just means that we close the case and we will not be following up any further. And then also you can always email me, or they can email me and say, sorry, I messed up. I was busy. I couldn't get the call, all the things. I do want to meet with an attorney, and then I can get them started in the process as well. Okay, so are there any questions about that process? Or TAP generally? I could talk about it all day. Okay.
I have a general question, not exactly what you were talking, but I wonder if you can answer, because from the state that I came from, there was an actual grant that helped domestic violence survivors or people who try to escape to get out to another family members within the U.S. Do we have that in Texas?
David, I don't have a specific answer to your question, but I think what I'm hearing from you and a few other advocates is this need for more general supportive resources if you have clients that are survivors of violence. And so I will coordinate with Lauren, who works at Texas Council on Family Violence, to see how we can provide that information to you. Lauren, you might also have that answer. I'm honestly not sure. But if that's something that you all might find useful, having just a general resource guide to help, like Chrissy, you said, if you're looking for specific resources of where to flee or to learn about funding to help whatnot, that's definitely something we can put together and get y'all if you feel that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I used to work in domestic violence in Oregon through the Department of Human Services. So that is the state, right? And they did provide this kind of grants up to, at that time, it was $1,200. And to help them buy a ticket to probably move to a place where they're going to be safe, including children, etc. Yeah, in that event. So I was just
I think David is talking about Families to Freedom.
Freedom.
It's called Families to Freedom.
As you're
or
talking
Freedom
about
to Families or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Christy. As you're talking about that, we work with an organization, the Center for Survivor Agency and Justice, and I'm on their email list, and I know that they have, and then also Free From, which is another organization that supports survivors, and I know that they do have a cash assistance fund to help survivors, whether they be flee from abuse or just get back on your feet. So let me look at that. Lauren and I are gonna, get together, and we're going to compile some resources that we can share.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Christy, for letting me know about that. Does anyone else have any other Families to Freedom? That's great to know. Any other questions about anything Melissa has shared, or Chapter 521 order, coerced debt, the steps to refer a client? Any general questions like that?
I have one question.
Absolutely.
Do the clients going through the program get priority for shelter? Like, say that they are trying to flee. I know you said you partner with certain shelters.
Right. So no. I think my answer to this is no. So we work with 6 DV programs, but not all of those programs are utilizing the pilot in their shelters. In fact, I don't think too many of them are, just because I wouldn't necessarily say that this program is best fit for someone who is still seeking housing, especially with shelter being so transitional. This can be more of a long-term process. So that is very, very separate. Like the clients that are coming from DV programs could be in general housing, or could be shelter, or could be other legal services or counseling. But it wouldn't change that priority list or move them up on the wait list or anything like that.
Okay, and I have one more question. You made a statement earlier that the clients have to be victims of domestic violence, right? How are you guys verifying it? I mean, classifying it as verified domestic violence and not an abuser? I mean, I know we use discretion, but
Right. Melissa, I'm gonna let you answer that because you all essentially are the ones I don't think we're verifying.
No, we don't verify. I mean, the the intake people will ask questions like, because sometimes people will call us saying they need a divorce and they will say, you know, are you a victim of family abuse or have you been a victim? And if they say no, fine. If they say yes, we take them to the attorney.
Okay.
If the attorney has the consult with them and decides there's no legal issue here relating to abuse that I need to deal with. So for example, we don't do wills and estates, right? So even if the person is a victim of abuse and they come to us to talk to the lawyer's like, I'm not going to really be able to give you any advice on that, you know. So the civil issue has to be related to the abuse in some level, and the attorney will just have a conversation with the victim and figure that out. For the coerced debt pilot, I don't know, Brianna and Ann, you guys can tell me, Texas Advocacy Project is the one screening the debt, and it's our requirement that they be a victim of abuse in order to get services from us. The coerced debt issue typically happens in the context of abuse, so there probably wouldn't be coerced debt if there was not abuse. So we'd get through the system and find the eligibility issues at some point.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so just if it's addressed to us, we just go ahead and try to push it through, and at some point you guys will be able to find the loophole.
Yeah, if there's no abuse, I mean, we haven't come across that hardly at all. I mean, I know our intake people do sometimes, but in the coerced debt issue, we've never come across that. We have come across issues where people do not have coerced debt, but they want other help from TAP. And I just want to say that is totally fine. You guys, now that you know about us, should always feel free, whether it's in your personal life, professional life, anything, to send people our way.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'll just say too, I think the general philosophy of the program has been like, we just trust the word of the client, and if they're asserting that they're a survivor, then we will believe them. But we really appreciate your question too. Sure, there may be that one person who's lying, but we go with a screen in mindset, not a screen out.
I just will be nervous if I sent a actual abuser and I heard you guys outline that, so I would just be nervous about it.
Yeah, and it
Fair.
happens. I mean, never feel like there was something you could have done about it, right? I mean, we do the best to screen them out, but it happens.
Any other questions, y'all? These have been really great. I'm gonna have to add them to my FAQ sheet. Any other ones, y'all? Okay, I think now we're going to transition to just a 5-minute break. I know it's not a lot of time, but just want people to take a minute to soak everything in. And then when we come back, we're going to wrap up with some information on trauma-informed care and then some next steps.
Yes, so I do want to say a couple things first that I understood that some people had requested some training around trauma-informed care. And since our organization talks about it constantly, I had created a training for some pro bono attorneys, and I just modified this training. So if it sounds a little bit like attorney-ish, that's why. I recorded it, and so I'm probably going to spend some time reading my notes because I haven't given the training live. I've only done it in a recorded training. So, yeah, those are just the little things I want to say. I'm going to go through it quickly, and if you guys have questions, and I guess Brianna, you can interrupt me if they need to be answered, or otherwise we can just talk about it at the end.
Will do.
Okay, so during this presentation, I'll discuss the dynamics of power-based abuse and principles of empowerment-based advocacy, which are two essential concepts for anyone working with survivors of domestic violence. These clients face complex challenges, including emotional trauma, fear, and coercion by their abusers, which can erode their sense of autonomy and influence their decision-making. So understanding these dynamics will better equip you to provide compassionate and client-centered guidance, which will ultimately build trust with the clients. So Hopefully, by the end of this, you will identify the various forms of power-based abuse, including physical violence, emotional and psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and stalking, along with other less common forms of abuse. You'll recognize the psychological impact that power-based abuse has on survivors. You will understand the barriers to and complex reasons why victims may not leave abusive situations. You'll learn how to implement empowerment-based advocacy techniques. And finally, you'll learn how to incorporate trauma-informed approaches into your interactions with survivors. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about before we move on. First, this training does involve sensitive issues related to domestic violence and trauma. So please feel free to take a break if you need to. And then my pronouns, we recognize that power-based abuse can happen to anyone. In our work, we primarily refer to the victim as she or her, because the reality is that over 95% of our clients are women. But just please know that I do not mean to exclude or diminish the impact that this type of abuse has on all genders. And then I will interchangeably use victim and survivor. We originally called all of our clients survivors, feeling that that was the more empowering way to refer to these victims. But we've had a series of focus groups with our past clients and current clients, where they said, we didn't feel like survivors at all when we came to you for help. And so we felt like it was a program that wasn't meant for us. So we've started using the word victim more often. So I just wanted to mention that as you hear me say victim and survivor sometimes. Okay, so power-based abuse. We serve victims of dating and domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, stalking, human trafficking. And so over the years, we have used different terms to describe this abuse. We've used family violence or intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And so we now understand that all of these forms of abuse are grounded in power and control. So this broader term helps advocates, attorneys, and mental health practitioners recognize the patterns across all of these different forms of abuse, and so they can approach it more holistically and then ultimately, ideally, address the fundamental drivers that drive this abuse. So power-based abuse is the umbrella term that encompasses various forms of abuse where the central mechanism is exerting control, domination, or power over another person. This type of abuse occurs when one person in a relationship uses methods and tactics to gain and maintain power and control over the other person. So while physical violence is often present, in the clients that we see, power-based abuse is about coercive control. So coercive control is a deliberate and systematic pattern of behavior designed to limit a person's freedom and ability to pursue their own needs, values, and desires. This control can manifest in various ways, including threats, manipulation, and physical violence, all aimed at limiting the victim's choices and autonomy. Coercive tactics typically escalate over time, and especially when the victim becomes less compliant. Basically, if you undermine a person's sense of autonomy and erode their sense of self, you can exercise a lot of control over them. So the abuser acts as if the door is open and the victim can leave at any time. So these are the most common forms of power-based abuse that we see at Texas Advocacy Project. So first there's physical abuse, and we know what that looks like. It's not necessarily the most common form of power-based abuse, but it is the most visible. So it includes hitting, shoving, kicking, any type of physical abuse that's meant to cause harm. Strangulation is one of the more lethal forms of physical abuse, and it is different from choking. So you will often hear victims say, oh, he choked me. But choking is something that typically happens when like an object blocks your airway, like a piece of food. But strangulation is an external restriction of airflow and blood flow that can cause unconsciousness, and if prolonged, can be fatal. Emotional and psychological abuse. Okay, so those can be some of the most damaging forms of abuse to survivor. The physical abuse and bruising fades, but the the psychological effects are really long lasting. And these are things like humiliation, extreme jealousy and possessiveness, criticizing and belittling, ignoring or dismissing, blaming, punishing, and gaslighting. So these are all tactics of coercive control, where we're going to discuss in a minute. But they create serious barriers to leaving the abuser, because over time, the confidence and self-worth are just chipped away so much that victims start to believe they cannot survive without the abuser. There is sexual abuse as well. And I do want to say, so sexual violence is best understood as a continuum of unwanted, non-mutual sexual activities that range from subtle to extremely violent. It is very common for many survivors to not recognize that they've experienced sexual violence from their partner. It can be as much as obvious as rape or sexual assault, but it also includes things like reproductive manipulation, so controlling or interfering with someone's reproductive health choices, such as sabotaging birth control, or pressuring someone to terminate a pregnancy. It can also be what we call non-consensual intimate image sharing. Used to be called revenge porn, but for a lot of reasons, you could see why that's a bad term. So this is when intimate photos or videos of the survivor are shared without their consent. And then also forcing someone to participate in or being exposed to degrading sexual imagery or acts can also be a form of sexual abuse. Child abuse. So while child abuse is a crime in Texas, there is often an overlooked form of child victimization, which is exposure to domestic violence within the home. And so some of the research shows that some of the most damaging adverse childhood experiences are direct exposure to violence, abuse, or neglect, and witnessing violence in the home or community. Human trafficking is the business of stealing freedom for profit. It's a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry that denies freedom to 25 million people around the world. So traffickers will use force, fraud, or coercion to lure their victims and force them into labor or commercial sexual exploitation. They look for people who are susceptible for a variety of reasons, including psychological or emotional vulnerability, economic hardship, lack of a social safety net, addiction, victims of natural disasters or political instability, and in the United States, those who have vulnerable immigration status. The trauma caused by the traffickers can be so great that many of the victims may not even identify themselves as victims of trafficking. So they don't ask for help even when they're in highly public settings. I want you guys to know, you may already, that human trafficking does not only exist in illegal or underground industries. Human trafficking cases have been reported and prosecuted in industries like restaurants, cleaning services, construction, and hotels. And I want to distinguish between sex work and sex trafficking. So sex work is when a person willingly takes part in the sale of sex. It is consensual and doesn't affect their human rights in any way. Sex trafficking is when the person takes part in the sale of sex through threat, abduction, or other means of coercion. So there's a real difference there. Economic abuse, we have spoken about. I'm not going to go through there. And then finally, stalking. Stalking is just a form of power-based abuse that involves repeated unwanted attention and harassment intended to intimidate and create fear in the victim. So it has to be a pattern of behavior directed towards a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel harassed, intimidated, abused, or terrified. And in recent years, digital stalking or cyber stalking has become increasingly prevalent. So digital stalking can involve monitoring someone's online activity, hacking into personal accounts, using GPS tracking through apps and devices to follow their movements in real time. And social media in particular has made it easier for stalkers to gather information about a victim, keep track of their location, and harass them from behind the anonymity of the internet. So those are various forms of power-based abuse. Now, the power and control wheel. This was developed, I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but it was developed in the 1980s and it remains widely used as a tool in understanding the tactics abusers use to exert control over their victims. So it was developed in cooperation with domestic violence survivors, and it has a lot of gendered language, but it still is the main tool that experts use while testifying in court to explain how power and control is at the center of the physical and sexual violence. So this power and control wheel distills the complex dynamics of power-based abuse into clear and understandable segments. So that helps both the victims and professionals grasp the overarching patterns of coercive control. At the center of the wheel, you have power and control. That represents the abuser's ultimate goal. As we just learned, in abusive relationships, one person typically exerts power and control over the other person. The 8 pieces of the pie each represent a different tactic or form of abuse. These tactics exist on a spectrum and often escalate when the abuser feels they are losing control or they perceive resistance or a loss of power over the victim. And then surrounding the tactics is the outermost section of the wheel, physical and sexual violence. These forms of violence act as the enforcers, ensuring compliance with the other, often more subtle forms of control. Physical and sexual assault or threats to commit them are the most apparent forms of domestic violence and are usually the actions that allow others to become aware of the problem. However, the regular use of coercive and controlling behaviors by the abuser, when reinforced by one or more acts of physical violence, makes up a larger system of abuse. So I'm not going to go through all of these here for the sake of time, but I mean, feel free. I think you're going to get these. Also, feel free to look up the power and control wheel. There are now a lot of versions of this. Some will gear towards LGBTQ couples because there's different levels and dynamics of power and control. So it's widely used, but this one that I'm showing you right here is the most common one used. Okay, and then we have some additional coercive control tactics that I'm just going to mention real quickly that are not on the power and control wheel. And so you probably, I don't know how much of this you will see, but sometimes knowing this helps you be alerted to, oh, maybe there's an issue here. So the regulation, it involves strategies and tactics that are employed to ensure compliance with the abuser's demands. So there's a lot of monitoring and stalking and interrogating. Exploitation, this tactic involves the abuser manipulating the victim's finances, energy, time, or even physical and emotional capabilities to benefit themselves. And so the victim feels dependent, trapped, or indebted. So, for example, you financially drain the victim or exploiting their trust. So then there's degradation, involves belittling, humiliating and insulting the victim. And the aim there is to destroy their self-esteem and their sense of self-worth. So the abuser may constantly criticize the victim, attacking her character, her intelligence, her abilities, and often does this in public. And then the deprivation of freedom. So controlling the victim's everyday life deprives them of making their own personal choices. This could include dictating where they can go, who they can see, what they can wear, and even when they can eat or sleep. It also can include detailed instructions on everyday behavior, such as how household chores should be performed. And then there can be penalties if it's not done to the abuser's satisfaction. So what are the effects on the survivor on all of this? So first, there's low self-esteem and feeling unworthy or undeserving of respect. And this is probably the most common impact we see at Texas Advocacy Project in these victims. This deep erosion of self-worth can make it even harder for survivors to envision a future free from abuse or to seek the support that they deserve. Denial or minimization of the abuse. Many survivors will downplay or even deny the severity of the abuse they experience as a way to cope with the pain from it. For instance, a survivor might tell themselves it wasn't that bad, or even place blame on themselves with thoughts like, I shouldn't have said that. Aggressiveness and anger. Abuse can lead to heightened aggressiveness and anger, which may surface in the survivor's interactions with others. So, for example, a survivor might respond with uncharacteristic hostility in situations where they feel threatened or controlled because they're redirecting their anger that they cannot safely express towards their abuser. Chronic anxiety is common among survivors, often stemming from the unpredictability of the abusive experiences. A survivor might experience frequent panic attacks or excessive worry over everyday situations, which is reflecting the heightened state of alertness that they're in. And then, of course, depression can often set in, and they often struggle to find any joy in life. And then there's PTSD, which is a common response to trauma, and we're going to go over that in a few minutes. But the constant surveillance, threats, manipulation just create a sense of danger that doesn't dissipate. Even when the survivor is no longer with the abuser, it just profoundly impacts how they process information and interact with systems that are meant to help them. So why don't they just leave? Okay, we've all said that, we've all thought it, we've all heard it. People think, what is wrong with her that she stays with the person who just abuses her? You know, don't beat yourself up for saying this. Don't judge yourself. For most of us, the act of staying with someone who abuses us or who is dangerous makes no sense. So we all fall into the trap of judging the victims. But what seems like a straightforward choice is actually very tangled in layers of fear, control, and survival. So it really overlooks the immense courage required to navigate leaving an abuser. So I want to talk for a few minutes about understanding some of the barriers to leaving. So leaving an abuser is about more than simply making a choice to go. It requires navigating a complex web of emotional, financial, physical, and psychological barriers that can feel insurmountable. So we talk about how abuse stems from a desire for power and control. The ultimate loss of that power and control occurs when a victim leaves. So the coercive control tactics that abusers typically use, what they had relied on before, they become ineffective once the victim leaves. So that is when they are at the highest risk of escalation and more extreme forms of violence. The biggest reason people don't leave, of course, is fear. And that includes physical harm to themselves, their children, other loved ones, pets, all of that. And it is just, this fear is compounded by the messages of inadequacy and worthlessness. So victims think that even if they left, they wouldn't be able to survive on their own. So you can see here some other reasons that people would be afraid to leave, other barriers. And I just want to talk about one that seems very strange for people, but love and hope can really play a complex role in a victim's decision to leave. They have deep emotional bonds with their abusers, and the thought of losing someone that they love can be terrifying. It also leads victims to hold on to hope that their abuser will change or the relationship can be repaired. So abusive relationships often involve a cycle of tension, abuse, reconciliation. So we try very hard not to judge if that is the reason that survivors are staying. We try very hard not to judge them on that. So the decision to leave could mean obviously an escalation of the partner's violence, an increased risk for children, the loss of their home, their income, their health insurance, their immigration status, and then loss of a community that both they and their abuser are part of. And oftentimes these communities, they're afraid the communities will choose sides. Sometimes religious reasons, leaving your husband or getting divorced are not acceptable. So there are a lot of forces working that create barriers to the victim leaving. Okay, so what is a trauma-informed practice like? When working with survivors of power-based abuse, it is really important to understand that the profound impact that trauma has on their well-being and their decision-making. So by addressing the unique needs of these clients, you can create a supportive environment that empowers them to and fosters trust and ultimately leads to better outcomes. So what is trauma? Most people think of trauma as something that happens to us, like a car accident, witnessing violence, war, loss of a child. But we now know that trauma is actually something that happens in us. It embeds itself in our nervous system and it influences how we respond to the world around us. So rather than a single major event, trauma can be anything that overwhelms someone's ability to cope. Some people describe trauma as too much, too soon, too fast. So a good definition of trauma is that it is an emotional, psychological, or sometimes physical response to a deeply distressing event or series of events that has a lasting impact on an individual's functioning and well-being. So over the past decade, our understanding of trauma and its effects on a person has expanded significantly. Mostly due to advances in neuroscience, psychology, and social awareness. So today we recognize trauma as not just from obvious incidents, but also that it had a huge impact on the brain. It can reshape your nervous system, alter your brain structure, influence your physical health, and even your gene expression. That you've heard people talk about trauma that is handed down through generations and that they have discovered is real. So our trauma responses, you've heard of the first two, fight and flight. And so freeze it's sometimes when you're faced with potential threats, your body just triggers a freeze response. It's instinctual, there's nothing you can do about it. It works as a strategic pause, allowing someone to assess the situation and determine the most appropriate course of action. And then fawn is one that we often see. So this is a response to trauma that's less well known, but it's the use of people pleasing, appeasing, and accommodating others as a way to diffuse conflict and ensure safety in a threatening situation. So in the context of abuse, survivors may use fawning as a way to diffuse the tension by calming their abuser or engaging in overly attentive, like super social behaviors, such as apologizing, sacrificing their own needs, and prioritizing the abuser's emotions. So these are things that we see when people are triggered and when trauma occurs or the triggering of the memory of the trauma occurs. We will see people responding with these responses. So what is a trauma-informed practice? It means that advocates working with survivors that understand trauma and its impact and its manifestations. It enables you to interact with clients in ways that acknowledge and respond to the trauma. It focuses on creating a safe and supportive environment, respecting the survivor's autonomy, and avoiding actions that could inadvertently re-traumatize clients. So a trauma-informed practice really requires that you are aware of how trauma influences a person's behavior, communication, and decision-making. So the key principles of a trauma-informed practice include safety. It is really important for you to make survivors feel physically and emotionally safe. Ways to do that is validating their experiences, avoiding judgment or criticism, and providing reassurance. Trustworthy and transparency is important through clear, consistent communication and realistic expectations. Collaboration, engage clients as active participants, value their input, respect their choices, even if you don't often think they're the best choices to make, and you work together to develop strategies that align with their goals and needs. Cultural competency, be sensitive to the client's cultural, historical, and gender-related experience. So recognize how these factors may influence their trauma responses. So for example, a survivor from a culture that emphasizes family honor may be reluctant to discuss details of their abuse because they they feel shame, and they feel fear of repercussions from their family. So being asked to share personal details may evoke a trauma response. So just demonstrate your understanding and respect for these values, and just reassure them always their confidentiality will be maintained. Adjust your strategies to accommodate the ways trauma may impact communication and decision-making, and then be flexible. Be adaptable to your clients' changing needs and preferences throughout your work with them. Just understand that trauma responses may vary, and be prepared to modify approaches as necessary. So I just want to talk on empowerment-based advocacy. This is something that's really important to us at Texas Advocacy Project, and is something that we really focus on with our pro bono attorneys. And so I just want to touch on it for a minute. This approach centers on recognizing and elevating the voices of survivors. So acknowledging their autonomy and providing them with the tools they need to make informed decisions about their lives. It is shifting the power dynamic in the advocate and survivor relationship. So instead of making decisions for their survivor or telling them what they need to do next, we focus on collaborating with them and ensuring that they have a sense of agency every step of the way. So it means listening to their needs and concerns, validating their experiences. Hold on one second. I still have a landline. And the voicemail just started going off. I apologize. So validating their experiences and respecting their decisions. It's really crucial in the context of power-based abuse, because victims have had all of the power and control stripped from them. And so we want to be mindful of this history and just help them reclaim their agency to rebuild their confidence. So you'll see here some of the key concepts. The autonomy, we use a strengths-based approach. So it means recognizing and leveraging the client's strengths and their skills and their resilience. So when you're working with them, highlight their strengths, and you can help build their confidence. Agency and choice, they are the best. Survivors are the best. They're the experts of their own lives. And so if a certain choice and decision isn't going to work for them, and they tell you that, we need to honor that. And then self-determination. So I know I went through that fast. I actually do have this training recorded for pro bono attorneys on our Teachable platform at Texas Advocacy Project. So if you want to just hear the whole thing, it is an hour long, and you are welcome to do that. I think we also have some resources on the website, Brianna. So if you really do want to learn more about working with survivors of violence and how you can really be trauma informed, then I encourage you to listen to those as well, because they're really, really helpful, and it goes into a lot more detail. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. That was a really thorough presentation. I feel like I also learned some new things, so I really appreciate you covering it. Y'all, we just have a couple minutes left, so gonna go over a couple of things in terms of next steps and what you do. So first, wanted to briefly say something about managing expectations. For survivors that are seeking access to coerced protections, identity theft protections through the pilot program, it's really important to make sure that you're setting realistic expectations regarding the process. It requires time, and there is no guarantee that they are going to get this Chapter 521 order. We also just want people to know that how long this process will take shouldn't deter folks from pursuing it. But just letting them know very transparently, it's going to take some time and there is no guaranteed outcome, making sure that they're aware. And also hinting on empowerment through choice. And so even in cases where identity theft relief may seem unlikely, it can still be really valuable for a survivor to go through this process. Some survivors will view it as a way to maintain control over their situation. And so just being transparent about what the process will take, and also letting people know this isn't a guaranteed solution to any coerced debts that they have. So in terms of what's up next, I will be sending an email to both organizations separately, recapping everything that we've talked about. So I'm going to make sure that you all get access to the Coerced Debt Resource website, which has all those important materials, and I'll include any additional attachments like that release of information, since that's not up on the website quite yet. The leaders of your organization will be attending monthly meetings, so this is an opportunity for them to share any feedback that you all have about the program. You also can always email me. And so they'll be participating in that. That consists of leadership, DV program advocates, Texas Appleseed, Texas Council on Family Violence, and the Texas Advocacy Project. Again, I have office hours, y'all, every day from 4 to 4:45, but you can call me. You can text my work cell if you want. You can email me. We can definitely set up some time to chat if y'all have questions about anything. Also, I send weekly email updates either on Monday or Tuesdays, just with reminders and important updates. And so I will be very present in your inboxes. You do not need to respond to me. Just want to remind folks that we have the pilot program going on and to stay engaged. And then we have some links here. We'll also make sure to share out this presentation, but to a couple of different resources. We did create a toolkit on coerced debt. The Texas Coalition on Coerced Debt did. And so we'll make sure that you all have that. That's good for advocates and survivors themselves with coerced debts. And then there is something called a compendium on coerced debt. It has everything you could possibly ever know about coerced debt, background knowledge, impacts, data, statistics, resources. And so we'll make sure that y'all get access to those documents as well. And then we have one final brief poll, and do you want to go ahead and run this? Based off of all of the content that we've shared to y'all today and also on your past experience, this could be super rough estimate, y'all, but how many clients do you think you will refer to this program? There's no right or wrong answer at all. We're just curious if you want to kind of get a baseline based off of your experience. If it's none, then that's okay too. All right, y'all. So it looks like a tie between a client every few months and a few clients per year. That's good to know. And some of us just aren't sure. And I think that definitely makes sense too. Okay. Thank y'all for providing that information. And so we have 2 minutes left. Does anyone else have any questions or any final thoughts that they want to share before we hop off? All right, y'all. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for showing up on a Tuesday evening. I hate meetings that end at 5, but y'all, it's what we had to do. I really appreciate y'all participating. I know it was a lot of information, so I'll follow up with y'all by the end of the week just to reiterate a lot of what we said and to make sure that y'all are fully prepared to move forward with referring folks to the pilot program. And I'll stay on for a minute or two in case anyone wants to chat after, but thank y'all so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Of course, Summer. Thank you.
Thank you.